Welcome to Inside Badger Nation on Madison CW. Now your hosts, Ben Wargle and Phil Dawson.
Well, a happy new year and welcome into Inside Badger Nation. Along with Ben Wargle of BadgerNation.com, I'm Phil Dawson on the Big 1070 radio here in Madison. And boy, do we have a big show for you to start up this new year, including recapping what happened to the Badgers in the Capital One Bowl against South Carolina. The Badger basketball team continues to roll. We'll have our email question of the week, and of course, we have some recruiting news to get to you as well, and we'll go one-on-one with a Badger freshman hoopster as well. We do start, though, Ben, by going to Orlando. You were there. Tough one for the Badger football team. Connor Shaw in South Carolina, just too darn good. He accounts for 5 touchdowns total in this one, rushing, throwing 3, and catching another one. Just too much Connor Shaw.
Disappointing performance again by the Wisconsin secondary. You look at where Wisconsin fell short in their regular season finale against Christian Hackenberg, and just wasn't solid coverage. And you know, the group really talked about wanting to step up and perform better and have that signature win on their resume to kind of boost them into next season. And Wisconsin had some gadgetry in this game too. You saw the Wildcat from Corey Clement and this fake field goal they tried that didn't work. And you know, the running game really established a good tone for Wisconsin this game. They ran for 200 plus yards, the most that South Carolina had allowed all season. But Connor Shaw, which we'll see in a minute here, just torched Wisconsin's secondary, a group that just really just did not perform up to high standards that you need this year when they played above average quarterbacks. And Joel Stave has kind of been one of those guys this year that really drew a lot of criticism. He played well in this game. I mean, you look at, he threw an interception early in the game, came back with that touchdown pass. South Carolina took a lead here, as you can see, 13-7 when they missed on a 2-point conversion. Stave comes back, nice, long, sustained drive, 6+ minutes, got Wisconsin into the end zone with a touchdown pass you're going to see here to give them a 14-13 lead at halftime. Wisconsin built on that lead, 17-13 in the second half, but like you mentioned, Phil, too much Connor Shaw, too much poor play by Wisconsin's secondary. Allowed South Carolina in the second half to take the lead, and they never gave it up.
Right, and the other thing is you lost Joel Stave at the end of this game, too. Kurt Phillips had to come in and just couldn't manufacture drives and points, and Stave went down with an injury. And here's Jadeveon Clowney, right, trying to run and catch Melvin Gordon. Couldn't catch him on this one, had a couple other big plays. But that's the other thing. When we get to the Connor Shaw highlights, you can see, and here's where Stave exited the game. Kurt Phillips had to come in. Connor Shaw and the receivers making plays on the defensive secondary as well is one of the problems that we've seen all year long.
This was a big play here. This was a big play here for Wisconsin to get back in the game with Kenzel Doe, 91 yards. Wisconsin had not been playing well in the second half. We mentioned Stave was out of the game, the secondary. Kenzel Doe's 91-yard return got Wisconsin back into this football game. But the secondary, like we mentioned, Connor Shaw comes right back, nice sustained drive to get that lead back up to 10 points. And like you mentioned, Phil, with the offense, the final 4 drives of this game, Melvin Gordon could not convert on a 3rd and 1 and a 4th and 1 deep in South Carolina territory. And the last 3 drives, 2 interceptions by Kurt Phillips and a fumble by Melvin Gordon on a hook and ladder play. All these drives ended in South Carolina territory. No points, no success for Wisconsin, who didn't have an offensive touchdown in the second half.
So then we take a look at what does this whole season mean. The first year for head coach Gary Anderson has to be successful when you're talking about the transition that he made. But Ben, they're a 9-4 team and maybe didn't win the biggest games that were on their schedule. So how do we judge it? They end the year ranked 22nd in the top 25 poll, kind of right around where they started. So how do we look at back on this season?
I'd say the year was, above average. Especially, I thought it was great with the transition, Phil, like you mentioned. I mean, you bring in a new head coach, you bring in 7 new assistants, you bring in a new scheme on defense, you bring in a new kind of philosophy on offense. A lot of older players on this team, 20-plus seniors. You kind of wondered, how is this going to go? And I thought for the most part it went very well. But you look at their 4 losses, arguably against the 4 best teams on their schedule. You lose at Arizona State, albeit with a little asterisk with that game.
Definitely.
You lose at Ohio State in a game by 7 that you could have won if your secondary would have played a little bit better. A bizarre loss against Penn State, a Penn State team that Wisconsin on paper was clearly better than. Then you lose in the Capital One Bowl against South Carolina, a game that you really didn't finish your opportunity. So, it's hard to really kind of weigh this team because they have a win against a team that finished the year in the top 25. They didn't have that signature win that Wisconsin was kind of searching for all year. So 9-4, like you mentioned, Phil, what they finished ranked. Funny, Arizona State finished ranked ahead of them in both the AP and the coaches poll. Kind of a little salt in the wound there. It's just one of those things where it's hard to evaluate how good this team was because they really didn't play anybody or they really didn't beat anybody on their schedule. It's going to be interesting, too, because you lose all these players. You lose Aberderis, you lose Pedersen, you lose James White, you lose your entire front seven, including Chris Borland. How good is this team going to be next year? And also, this team doesn't really play anybody next year. They have LSU in the opener, and then none of their Big Ten games are arguably that hard with no Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, or Penn State on your schedule.
And, of course, the biggest question, now we know Melvin Gordon is coming back, but what's going to happen at quarterback? Tanner McAvoy said he'll challenge for the position. We'll see if that happens. And, of course, a guy that we've talked about many, many times here, could DJ Gillens come in and actually compete for that starting quarterback job, have Joel Stave coming back as well. Maybe one of the biggest storylines going into the offseason for this Badger football team. When we come back, we're going to hit the hardwood with Badger Hoops, still undefeated as of this taping. That's next. Welcome back into Inside Badger Nation. We'll go one-on-one with Badger freshman Riley Deering in a little bit, but we are going to talk hoops right now as the Badger men's basketball team entered Big Ten play 13-0. They went to Northwestern to open up the Big Ten, and things went their way. Maybe their most and best executed game of the year, Ben. 76-49 the final here. They were up 41-14 at the half against Northwestern. Everything going the Badgers' way. And I think it was the 6th time that they had 4 players in double digits. Another impressive performance from the Badgers.
Yeah, just a total team performance in this game. The first half, Bo Ryan said, was probably one of the best halves they had played all season. Nigel Hayes, incredible in this game. And, you look at freshmen, how they play in the non-conference season. And when you get to conference play traditionally in your first year, it's that big kind of jump up in terms of intensity, in terms of physicality, just because the teams are so familiar with one another. And I think that Nigel Hayes kind of had a nice welcoming to the conference because it is Northwestern, a team that's going through some transition, a new coaching staff, new kind of philosophy. You're not seeing as much, of the 1-3-1 zone and the Princeton cut. And the ball movement in this game by Wisconsin was impeccable. Just very solid play around the perimeter. But Nigel Hayes in the low post, along with Frank Kaminsky, had a nice game. Decker and Brust as well. Just a lot of action to the rim in this game. A lot of smart ball movement and a lot of just really solid play. But Nigel Hayes, career high 19 points in this game. Back-to-back Big Ten Freshman of the Week honors. Just a tremendous performance in this game. And Ben Brust, too, kind of kidded after this game. He said his legs were dead. That's why he didn't dunk it. He's had to have some makeup work in terms of his dunking ability. But just one of those games where Wisconsin came out, dominated an inferior opponent from start to finish, never really let the Wildcats get back in the game or even have control in this game.
So again, they take out Northwestern with relative ease, and they do so on the shoulders of big Nigel Hayes right there getting things done. And then off to Iowa, or I should say back home, to welcome in Iowa, the team that's been the thorn in the side of this Badger basketball team. They came into that game, had won 3 of the last 4. Last year when they came to Madison, the Badgers had to beat them in double overtime, and this one started off like Iowa was going to take it right to them again. But in the second half, pandemonium or frandemonium, a frantrum, if you will, as the coach, Fran McCaffrey of Iowa, gets a second technical, kicked out of that game. And sure enough, the story changes from there as the Badgers, who were out-rebounded, out-played, out-hustled, out-everything in the first half, able to come back, make plays on the shoulders of Ben Brust in that second half and earn the victory.
Yeah, polar opposites in these halves for Wisconsin. Wisconsin down 11 early, did not play well. A lot of people thought maybe this is just a continuation of the Packer hangover with the Packers losing just, a couple minutes before kickoff. And there's Fran. Fran's leaving.
Adios.
He just absolutely lost his marbles in this game. And, Wisconsin down big at halftime, double digits. Wisconsin started chipping away. A lot of fouls called in this game. I think around 40 were called in this game. No one fouled out, surprisingly. But Iowa just absolutely could not make a shot in the second half. Started 2 for 14, I believe, and Wisconsin continued. That was Sam Decker's first field goal late in this game, and they were big. He had back-to-back three-point plays, three-pointer, and then an old-fashioned three-pointer that really kind of stemmed the tide for Wisconsin. And as you can see, Badgers just elated to escape in this basketball game. But Iowa just could not get momentum going. The fouls were starting to pile up, and Fran McCaffrey was upset about a non-foul call on the offensive end for Iowa, and then a kind of ticky-tack foul call on the other end and McCaffrey said after the game he was trying to get the first technical. He got it, but then went a little too far, had contact with the official. That turned into a 5-point possession for Wisconsin. Ben Brust made all 4 of his free throws. Nigel Hayes made 1 of 2. Wisconsin took the lead at that point, never gave it up. And then the Badgers got hot, and Iowa just could not get the momentum back on their side.
And when we take a look at what the Badgers did in this game, in the first half, Ben, that has to be the biggest thing that we learned about them. Iowa can continue to give them problems, right? They're long, lengthy, fast, up the floor so quickly in this one. And it gave a guy like Trey Jackson some big problems. He had 7 turnovers in this game, and obviously that helped Iowa not only grab the lead, but throughout the rest of the game. He was bothered by the speed there, and that's the most I've ever seen him kind of emotionally disturbed, rattled in a game, and that was against this Iowa team. And luckily, Ben Brust was there in the second half to knock down some big threes and big shots.
I think that's a concern going forward with Trey Jackson, too, is that Wisconsin has played, as of this taping, just 2 ranked opponents, Florida and Iowa, and both those games have been Trey Jackson's worst offensive performances of the year, just based on his assist to turnover ratio. I mean, 7 turnovers against Iowa, just really struggled with his control when he was driving into the paint, really looked lost, flustered, trying to get too many points back. And I think that's the one thing about Wisconsin we're not too sure about. Yes, they're a top 5 team in the country, but they've only played 2 ranked teams. They played a tough schedule, don't get me wrong, but we haven't seen them dominate a ranked opponent yet. And they have a chance, against Illinois before this. That's going to be on yesterday, but we don't know what happened yet. And then there's going to be some more opponents down the road that Wisconsin's going to play. Michigan State and Ohio State played a great game on Tuesday night. They're going to both come to the Kohl Center. Can Trey Jackson be that leader of that team in those 2 games to get Wisconsin a big victory? We don't know yet. And it's going to be one of those things that as this team develops, Trey Jackson's got to be that steady influence on this team if he's going to help Wisconsin not just stay undefeated for a long length of time, but win a Big Ten title, something that hasn't happened in Wisconsin in a number of years.
Yeah, and they'll find out, too. Michigan State does the exact same thing straight up the floor as soon as they get the ball out of that hoop. So more hoops coming up next. Riley Deering, you'll get to meet him next here on IBN. The Wisconsin basketball team, yes, undefeated as of this taping, and they have 6 freshmen on this year's squad. Just 2 of them are redshirting, though, and we get to meet one of them right now, Mr. Riley Deering, who hails from Minnesota, but a lifelong Badger fan? Let's find out. I'm here with Riley Deering as we get into another My Recruitment, and he hails from Minnetonka, Minnesota, now a freshman with the Wisconsin Badgers, wearing a red shirt this year, and we'll dive into that, but here on this My Recruitment, Riley, first of all, thanks for joining me. Let's talk a little bit about you, coming all the way down to Madison from Minnetonka, Minnesota. First and foremost, playing basketball up there. You come from a basketball family. When did basketball kind of become important to you?
It became, really important from day one. I mean, my dad had put the ball in my hand since I was a baby, so I'd always grown up watching him play in some summer leagues and stuff, so the game was always around, and it just became a habit, I guess.
And now playing probably in little bitty leagues and then into high school and all that kind of stuff. When did it become evident to you that if you worked on your game, you could be a collegiate player?
I really started to realize that this could take me somewhere. It was about 6th, 7th grade when I started getting my first letters from schools. And
oh, really?
Wisconsin was one of them. And my dad, he sat me down and he was like, if you really work hard at this and if you really want this, you can take it as far as you want.
So, what is it like when a 6th or 7th grader gets a letter from the school? Do you remember your first one?
Yeah, my first one was actually from, I think it was from Wisconsin.
Really?
Yep, my first one was from Wisconsin and then Minnesota. So it was a weird moment because you always watch those teams on TV and you're like, dang, maybe one day I could be playing for them. It was definitely a surreal moment.
Very cool. So then obviously you get into high school, 1,000-point scorer, big games, good teams, all that kind of stuff. When did the recruiting process really kind of take hold and you had to kind of start making, a thorough decision about it?
Probably my sophomore summer. That's when you really start seeing coaches come in and they talk to you, and you really got to start looking at what's best for you and what system you'll fit and stuff like that. So around that time.
So who was it from Wisconsin? Tell us about the actual recruitment from the Badgers coming and talking to you. I'm sure you got a chance to, meet Coach Ryan and all that kind of good stuff. Tell us about the actual recruitment here to Madison from the Badgers.
Well, I had talked to Coach Greg Gard
Since 7th grade.
Yeah, since 7th grade and stuff. So I had been real familiar with him, and he had been to a bunch of my games and stuff, and he had came up to my practices in high school sometimes and stuff. So me and him were really familiar. We developed a really close relationship. So, and then shortly after I met Coach Ryan, and he showed so much tradition, and I had so much respect for him that it made my decision really easy.
So I assume then, because of just proximity, by itself, that you were familiar with Wisconsin and the ability to get letters from them and talk to them. So were you a Badger fan? Were your fandom when you were growing up and in high school? You just keep an eye on the Badgers and like everybody else, like a Carolina and a Duke and all that?
I was pretty much always a Badgers fan. A lot of my family's from Wisconsin and Racine, so we were always Badgers fans. But I really just fell in love with the tradition that they had here, and Coach Ryan and what he tries to teach his players, and how he tries to develop the players and stuff. And plus, Wisconsin does really good with Minnesota guys,
They do.
as we've seen in the past. So that also helped in my decision to come.
Tell me now this, your decision, talking about the tradition. How about as a player? How does it fit you? How does, you've gone away from, the direct swing offense, but what do you see, what have you seen from the Badgers that says, hey, that fits my game?
Just a really, not structured, but disciplined, a really disciplined offense and defense that don't make very many mistakes and shoot the ball well and try to make plays offensively. I feel defensively, I can really bring a lot to this team. We play really tough defense. We got some tough guys who love to play defense, and I feel like I can help in that way. We got guys who like to put their face on the ball, like Coach Ryan would say. So I feel like I can help in that way as well.
And I assume, too, that's kind of what you're working on right now. Took the red shirt this year. Lots of guards on this team, so it kind of makes sense. Was it a pretty easy decision for you, or were there some thoughts like, maybe I could see some floor time here?
I thought it was a pretty easy decision. I mean, we're really guard heavy this year, and I just thought it'd make more sense to take my time and get stronger and develop more. And when I'm maybe when there's less guys, less guards, or I'm more ready, I could contribute to the team in the best way that I could. So right now I'm just contributing in practice, trying to compete with guys and give them what I got every day.
And so far so good here, life in Madison?
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it. It's great.
That's Riley Deering. Riley Deering, the Badger freshman, one of the 6 freshmen on this squad, and of course, one of the 2, he along with Aaron Maish, that are redshirting this year. And of course, got a couple of other freshmen who are playing. Bronson Koenig, obviously, but also Vito Brown, who we heard from in our last episode. And will we see any Jordan Hill this year? We'll find out. When we come back, we're going to hit the recruiting trail. What's next for the Badgers after a couple of misses? That's right here on Inside Badger Nation. We invite you to check us out on YouTube. We've got a bunch of videos there. Just search for us, Inside Badger Nation. You can also tweet at the show during the show. That's what we like to do, @InBadgerNation. And you can email the show, InsideBadgerNation@gmail.com. And maybe you can be our email of the week. Let's go to that right now. Our email question of the week is brought to you by Restaurant 608 down on State Street, 212 State Street, where 608 is more than just an area code. And this week's question, courtesy of Thomas in Middleton. Now that Wisconsin has lost in the Jamil Kamara and Joe Mixon race, who else could join the Badgers 2014 recruiting class? He's not big on capitalization, this Thomas. This is his email directly as it comes to us, so we just put it up there. That's Thomas in Middleton. So Ben, you and I both watching that Army game, the All-Army All-American game, seeing Joe Mixon put quite the display on. He won the Player of the Game award in that, the MVP of that. And we had to wait so long. Fourth quarter, he was the final decision to make. And he chooses Oklahoma. And by the way, says the Sugar Bowl performance was part of the reason why he selected the Sooners. And I ask you, Ben, why didn't he pick the Badgers? Come on, Joe.
Kind of surprising because we've been hearing up until that announcement that he was probably going to lean towards UCLA. I mean, the in-state school, and who had recruited him very, very hard. And for the first time, for me at least, a bowl performance kind of swayed a recruit in another direction. Usually this doesn't happen. You usually commit to just the program or the coaching staff or something like that. And for one performance, it kind of was kind of interesting. It makes me kind of think that UCLA is not going to give up on him. But I think Wisconsin just wasn't the right fit for him. Same with Jamil Kamara, who picked Virginia, the home state school, over Wisconsin. Kind of, you can't blame him, but I guess you kind of can blame him because he could get the same thing at Wisconsin that he probably could at Virginia, except being closer to home. So where the Badgers go for here? Well, we kind of have a big board to show you. We're going to bring that up now. Kind of look at who is remaining in this class that Wisconsin has a realistic chance at. George Rushing, a wide receiver who's committed to Louisville. We're going to talk about him more in a minute. He's going to kind of maybe fit that Jamil Kamara kind of fold. Colton Miller, who's visited Wisconsin already from California. Wisconsin's kind of battling with Oregon State for him. Chris Lamons, who's committed to Florida. Wisconsin's been hard after him. Lamons has come up and visited Wisconsin. He sees Wisconsin as a good fit for him, although he also said that it would take something drastic for him not to play at Florida. Well, Florida didn't play in a bowl game, Phil. Maybe that's drastic enough for him. Cale McGarry, he's coming on an official visit later this month. Same with Dakota Dixon from Florida. And DeAndre Porter, who's committed to South Florida right now. Porter fits that. He's listed as a quarterback, but Wisconsin likes him as a cornerback. Kind of would fit that cornerback need since Wisconsin doesn't have one in this recruiting class. Those are my top 6 guys that Wisconsin could fit. Probably anywhere from 1 to 5 scholarships remaining for the Badgers. If they can get any one of these guys, I think that Wisconsin's recruiting class, already a top 20 recruiting class, is going to even look that much more solid going into signing day next month.
And of course, if they can land what we call the IBN's most wanted. Bring it up! Gunshots for George Rushing. You just mentioned him, out of Florida. A lot of recruiting going on in Florida for this Badger staff. And of course, if you miss out on a wide receiver, you're hoping to get another one. If they land this guy, would this be their 5th wide receiver in this class?
You're right, Phil. I mean, this would be, it's total overhaul for Wisconsin in terms of their wide receiver position. I mean, you have Jared Aberdeen's, who's been your number 1 guy the last 2 years, and you really haven't developed that guy in the past years of just being that number 2 or that number 3 guy. So you're really hoping that a guy like, a Jamil Kamara could have stepped in, or a Crenwick Sanders could step in. And now you don't have Kamara, so now you need to go after another wide receiver. George Rushing has been that guy that's kind of been on Wisconsin's radar for a while. Rushing wanted to visit during the season, but Wisconsin kind of said, wait a minute, we got to see what happens with Jamil Kamara. Well, now Kamara is going to Virginia, so now Rushing's coming into the mix. He's going to visit in a couple weeks. He's also going to visit LSU. He's going to visit TCU. This is a guy that has really good speed, around 4.3 speed, and so this is a guy that can fit in well in the mix. I mean, you look at 670 yards last season, 13 touchdowns. He knows how to find the end zone. He'd be key for Wisconsin if they can land him.
Check BadgerNation.com for more on all of that, and we'll see you next week right here on Inside Badger Nation.